"I've already spent $20,000 on this tractor." The words were a gut punch of pure frustration, delivered by a man pushed to his breaking point. That man was Frank Miller, a 62-year-old farmer whose family had worked the same land in central Iowa for 4 generations. He was standing in the middle of a 1,000-acre cornfield under the blazing August sun, his face etched with the lines of worry that come from battling weather, markets, and failing machinery. He was gesturing, not with anger but with a kind of weary resignation, at his prized possession and current source of misery, a brand new John Deere 9RX 830. This wasn't just a tractor, it was a technological marvel, a $1 million monster on 4 massive rubber tracks, powered by an 18-liter engine producing over 900 horsepower. It was the largest, most powerful tractor John Deere had ever made, a machine designed to pull massive implements and cover hundreds of acres in a single day with satellite precision. And for the past 3 weeks, during the most critical part of the late summer planting season, it had been practically useless. But before we dig into the high-tech mystery that stumped a team of factory-trained experts, I have to ask, where in the world are you watching this story from? Are you in the United States, perhaps in Europe or another part of the globe? Drop a comment below and let me know. And tell me this, have you ever faced a problem so frustrating and expensive that you were ready to give up right before a breakthrough came from the most unexpected place? Let's build a community that celebrates that one crucial detail everyone else missed. The problem with the 9RX 830 was as maddening as it was elusive. The tractor would start and run perfectly. It could drive around the farm, pull light loads and operate its hydraulics without any issue. But the moment it was put under heavy load in the field, pulling the massive 24-row planter it was designed for, and the advanced GPS auto-steering system, AutoTrack, was engaged, the engine would intermittently derate or lose power. The 913 horsepower engine would suddenly feel like it had 300 horsepower. The tractor would bog down, the planting speed would plummet, and a vague, unhelpful engine power derate warning would flash on the massive touchscreen display for a second before disappearing. Then, just as suddenly, the power would return. It happened randomly. Sometimes it would work for an hour without issue. Other times it would happen every 5 minutes, making precision planting impossible. Frank Miller was losing a fortune. Every day the tractor was down during the tight planting window meant a potential loss of thousands of dollars in yield. He had, of course, called the John Deere dealership immediately. They were the experts, the only ones with the proprietary software and training to work on such a complex machine. The dealership's top field technician came out, plugged in his laptop, and read the fault codes. The codes were inconclusive, pointing vaguely towards a fuel delivery or turbocharger issue. Following the diagnostic flowchart, the tech replaced the primary fuel filters. The problem persisted. He then replaced the entire set of high-pressure fuel injectors, a job that cost Frank $6,000. The problem persisted. Next, convinced it was a turbocharger issue, the dealership replaced the massive variable geometry turbo, a $9,000 part plus labor. The problem persisted. Finally, in desperation, they replaced the main engine ECU, the tractor's brain, at a cost of over $5,000. After 3 weeks and more than $20,000 in bills, the John Deere 9RX 830 had a new fuel system, a new turbo, and a new brain, and the exact same problem. The dealership service manager finally called Frank and told him something no farmer ever wants to hear. "We don't know what's wrong with it. We've exhausted all our options." That's when Frank made a call he never thought he'd have to make. He didn't call another dealership. He called a number given to him by a friend from a neighboring county, a number for a person known in the agricultural community as a ghost hunter, a specialist who found the electronic gremlins that haunted modern farm equipment. That person was a mobile diagnostic technician named Sarah Chen. Sarah, 40 years old, was a former aerospace engineer who had left a high-paying job designing guidance systems for satellites to start her own business diagnosing complex problems in agricultural machinery. She operated out of a custom-built service truck, a rolling laboratory filled with oscilloscopes, network analyzers, and diagnostic tools far more advanced than what most dealerships owned. She drove to Frank's farm in Iowa from her home base in rural Illinois, arriving on a hot, humid morning with the sun just beginning to climb. Frank met her in the driveway, his skepticism barely concealed. He had been expecting a team of grizzled mechanics. Instead, he got one woman in a clean work shirt and a truck that looked more like a mobile command center than a mechanic's vehicle. He spent 30 minutes recounting his tale of woe, detailing the replaced parts, the mounting bills, and the dealership's ultimate surrender. He pointed to the giant green tractor sitting silently in the field, looking like a defeated beast. "I've had the best guys from John Deere out here. If they can't fix it, with all their factory training and special tools, how can you?" His question wasn't meant to be insulting. It was a genuine expression of his despair. Sarah listened patiently, nodding, her eyes fixed on the tractor, not on Frank. When he was finished, she said something that caught him completely off guard. "They couldn't fix it because they were all looking at the tractor, Mr. Miller. They were looking for a broken part. I'm not going to look at the tractor. I'm going to listen to it." Without another word, she walked to the 9RX, climbed up the massive steps, into the state-of-the-art cab, and plugged her ruggedized laptop into the diagnostic port. Frank watched from the ground, expecting her to start reading fault codes like all the others, but she didn't. She opened a software program he had never seen before, one with a complex interface of scrolling data streams and network diagrams. For the next hour, she didn't turn a single wrench. She just sat in the cab, creating what she called a data map. She had Frank start the engine. She activated the hydraulics. She engaged the PTO. With each action, she captured millions of data packets from the tractor's CAN bus network, the digital nervous system that connected its dozens of onboard computers. She was watching the machine's internal conversation, looking for an argument. After an hour, she climbed down from the cab. "Okay, the static tests are clean, just like the dealership found. All the modules are talking to each other correctly when the tractor is sitting still. The only way to find the ghost is to make it appear. We have to go into the field and replicate the failure under full load." Frank sighed. He'd done this half a dozen times with the dealership techs, but there was a quiet confidence in Sarah's demeanor that gave him a sliver of hope. He hitched the massive planter to the tractor, and together they drove into the sprawling cornfield. Sarah took the passenger seat, her laptop securely mounted, her fingers flying across the keyboard, initiating a high-speed data capture. "Okay," she said. "Drive it exactly like you normally would. Engage the auto track, set your speed, and let's see what happens." Frank engaged the massive implement. The engine roared as it took the load, and the GPS system took control of the steering. The tractor moved forward, planting seeds with incredible precision. For 10 minutes, everything was perfect. The engine held its power. The tractor moved smoothly. Frank almost allowed himself to believe the problem had magically fixed itself. Then it happened. With a slight shudder, the engine note changed. The immense power vanished and the tractor bogged down, struggling to pull the heavy planter. On Sarah's screen, 1,000 lines of code flashed red. "There!" she yelled over the engine noise. "I've got it!" Just as quickly, the power returned, and the tractor surged forward. But Sarah had what she needed. She had captured the ghost. Back in the cool shade of the machine shed, Frank Miller watched as Sarah Chen stared intently at her laptop screen. The data she had captured during the brief failure in the field was now displayed as a series of complex graphs and logs. To Frank, it was an incomprehensible jumble of numbers and lines. To Sarah, it was a story, and she was reading it like a detective examining a clue. "Okay, here's what happened," she said, turning the screen toward him. The moment the engine derated, the CAN bus was flooded with corrupt data packets. It's like someone screaming gibberish in the middle of an important conversation. The other computers on the network see this garbage data. They can't validate it, so they enter a fail-safe mode. The engine computer's fail-safe is to cut power to prevent damage. That's why you're losing power. Frank was beginning to understand. "So it's not the engine?" "The engine is perfectly healthy," Sarah confirmed. "The new turbo and injectors you paid for were probably unnecessary. The engine is doing exactly what it's programmed to do when it receives bad information. Our problem isn't mechanical, it's digital. The question is, who is the one screaming?" She began the painstaking process of isolating the source of the corrupt data. Her software allowed her to analyze the unique digital address of every message sent across the network. She filtered through the millions of data packets she had captured, looking for the specific module that had sent the garbled message right at the moment of failure. It took her another 30 minutes. of intense concentration, but then she found it. The corrupt packets were all originating from the same address. The Starfire 7000 GPS receiver, the globe-like antenna on the roof of the tractor's cab that handled all the satellite guidance. This was a major breakthrough. For weeks, everyone had been focused on the engine. Sarah had just proven that the problem was originating in the GPS system. But why? The dealership had already tested the Starfire receiver itself and found no faults. They had even swapped it with a new one, and the problem remained. This meant the receiver itself was likely fine. The problem had to be in the communication between the receiver and the rest of the tractor. "The problem is in the wiring," Sarah stated with confidence. "Somewhere between that GPS dome on the roof and the main chassis computer, the signal is getting corrupted, but only under specific conditions. Heavy load and active steering. That's our next clue. What could possibly cause a signal to become corrupted only under heavy load?" Sarah's mind, trained in both engineering and diagnostics, began to cycle through the possibilities. It wasn't a simple broken wire. That would be a permanent failure, and the dealership's continuity tests would have found it. This was something intermittent, something conditional. The answer, she suspected, was not a broken connection, but an unwanted connection. Electrical interference. Under heavy load, the tractor's massive hydraulic system and electrical alternators are working at their peak, drawing huge amounts of current and creating powerful electromagnetic fields, EMF. If the GPS wiring harness was improperly routed or its shielding was compromised, it could be susceptible to picking up this EMF as noise, which would corrupt the delicate data signal it was carrying. "We need to inspect the entire wiring harness for the GPS receiver, from the roof down to the main junction box," she told Frank. "And I'm not looking for a break. I'm looking for where it's rubbing." This was a task that required painstaking physical labor. The harness snaked from the roof, down through the cab's A-pillar, under the floor, and through a crowded channel filled with dozens of other wires. Together, she and Frank began the tedious process of removing interior panels and exposing the wiring looms. The dealership techs had told Frank they had visually inspected the harness, but Sarah knew a visual inspection was not enough. After an hour of work, they had the entire harness exposed. Visually, it looked perfect. The thick black plastic loom was intact. There were no obvious signs of damage, no cuts, no burns. Frank felt his sliver of hope beginning to fade. "Looks fine to me," he said, disappointment in his voice. "Just like the dealer said." "They looked," Sarah replied, pulling out a specialized tool that looked like a small wand attached to her oscilloscope. "They didn't listen." The tool was a near-field EMF probe designed to detect electromagnetic fields. She had Frank start the tractor and engage the hydraulics to simulate a heavy load. She then began slowly running the probe along the entire length of the GPS wiring harness. For most of its length, the reading on her oscilloscope was flat, but as she reached a section of the harness near the floor, where it was bundled tightly with a much thicker power cable for the main hydraulic pump, the screen of her oscilloscope suddenly exploded with a chaotic pattern of spikes and noise. "There," she said, her voice calm but firm. "That's our ghost." She had found the source of the interference. From the factory, the low-voltage CAN bus data harness for the GPS had been zip-tied directly against the high-current power cable for the hydraulic pump. While both harnesses were insulated, years of constant microscopic vibration had caused the insulation on the inside wires to rub against each other. It hadn't worn through completely. There was no short circuit. But it had worn thin enough that a phenomenon called inductive crosstalk was occurring. When the hydraulic pump kicked in under heavy load, a powerful pulse of current surged through its power cable. This created a strong magnetic field that jumped across to the adjacent, poorly shielded GPS data wire, inducing a voltage spike or noise onto the delicate digital signal. This noise was the gibberish that was confusing the engine computer and causing the derate. It was a 1-in-a-million type, a failure, a perfect storm of unfortunate factory routing, long-term vibration, and a specific set of operating conditions. It was a problem you could never find with a simple multimeter or a visual inspection. You had to know what to listen for. The solution was almost laughably simple compared to the complexity of the problem. Sarah took a pair of wire cutters and snipped the factory zip ties that held the two harnesses together. She carefully separated the GPS data harness from the hydraulic power harness. Using her inspection scope, she found the microscopic chafed spot on both wires. The insulation was thin, but not broken. The cure didn't require replacing a $15,000 wiring harness. It required about 10 cents worth of high-quality electrical tape. She carefully wrapped the chafed section of each wire to reinforce the insulation. Then, using new zip ties, she re-secured the GPS harness a full 6 inches away from the hydraulic power line, ensuring they could never touch or influence each other again. She stood up and wiped the dust from her hands. That should do it. Frank stared at her, then at the two separated wires, then back at her. He couldn't believe it. He was a man who understood the value of hard work and heavy machinery, a man who had just spent $20,000 on new parts for his $1 million tractor. You're telling me this whole 3-week, $20,000 nightmare was caused by a zip tie? Sarah smiled. No, it was caused by two wires being too close together. The zip tie was just an accomplice. The whole fix took me 4 minutes. The 4 minutes Sarah took to separate and insulate the wires felt like an eternity to Frank Miller. He had watched her perform the laughably simple repair with a growing sense of disbelief. Could it really be that simple? Could a problem that had stumped a legion of factory-trained experts and cost him a small fortune really be solved with a roll of electrical tape and a few zip ties? The absurdity of it was almost too much to process. He had mentally prepared himself for another massive repair bill, another complex explanation, another round of expensive parts. He had not prepared for this. "Let's test it," Sarah said, her voice pulling him out of his stunned silence. She climbed back into the cab of the 9RX, her movements economical and precise. Frank followed, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and skepticism. He settled into the passenger seat, a space normally reserved for training new farmhands, and watched as Sarah started the massive engine. It rumbled to life with the same healthy sound it always had. The cab was quiet, insulated from the mechanical symphony happening outside. On the large touchscreen display, all systems showed green. "Same test as before," Sarah instructed. "Full load, auto track engaged. Let's try to make it fail." Frank drove the tractor out into the field, the massive planter trailing behind. He took a deep breath, engaged the implement, and pushed the throttle to its working speed. The 18-liter engine roared as it bit into the earth, the 4 massive tracks churning up the soil. He then engaged the auto track system. The steering wheel moved on its own as the tractor locked onto the satellite guidance path and began planting with sub-inch accuracy. This was the exact set of conditions that had reliably triggered the failure before. They drove for one pass down the half-mile-long field. The engine never wavered. The power was constant, immense. They turned at the end of the row and started back, still nothing. The tractor performed flawlessly. They made 4 passes, then 10, then 20. After a solid hour of continuous heavy work, the problem had not returned. The ghost was gone. Frank finally disengaged the throttle and brought the tractor to a stop in the middle of the field. He turned and looked at Sarah, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions: relief, gratitude, and a considerable amount of anger at the money he had wasted. "It's fixed," he said, the words coming out as a quiet statement of fact. "It's actually fixed. $20,000, a new turbo, new injectors, a new computer, and all it was a zip tie." Sarah nodded. "It's the hardest kind of problem to find, Mr. Miller. It's not a broken part. It's a flaw in the system's design. The mechanics who came before were good mechanics. They followed their training. Their training taught them to look for mechanical failures when the symptom is mechanical. They weren't trained to look for electromagnetic interference causing a logical fault in a computer network. They were speaking a different language than the problem." They drove the tractor back to the machine shed. Frank parked it, shut off the engine, and the silence that followed felt different. It was the silence of a healthy machine at rest, not the silence of a broken one. He climbed down from the cab and walked to his office, motioning for Sarah to follow. He sat down at his desk and pulled out a checkbook. "What do I owe you, Sarah? And please don't just tell me your standard fee. What you've done for me today. You saved my planting season. You saved this tractor. What's the number?" Sarah sat down opposite him. "My fee for a full-day diagnostic call is $2,000 plus travel expenses. That's all I'll accept for my labor." Frank started to protest, but she held up a hand. However, I have another proposal. This problem, this specific wiring issue, is likely not unique to your tractor. It's a design flaw from the factory. That means there are other farmers out there with this same model who are either having this problem now or will have it in the future. They're going to go through the same hell you did, wasting tens of thousands of dollars on parts they don't need. She leaned forward, her expression serious. So here's my offer. Instead of paying me a huge bonus, I want you to authorize me to write a detailed technical service bulletin based on my findings. I'll document the problem, the diagnostic procedure using an oscilloscope, and the simple 4-minute fix. I want to send that bulletin, free of charge, to every John Deere dealership in the country and post it to the independent agricultural mechanics forums. We can save hundreds of other farmers from this nightmare. The knowledge is worth more than the money. Frank stared at her. He had dealt with hundreds of vendors, mechanics, and salesmen in his 40 years of farming. He had never met anyone like her. He had offered her a windfall, and she had countered by asking for permission to help his competitors. It was a level of professional integrity he had almost forgotten existed. "You do that," he said, his voice thick with respect. "You write that bulletin, and I'll pay for its distribution. And I'm still writing you this check for $10,000, and you're going to accept it. Not as a bonus, but as the first contribution to whatever you want to do next." The bulletin Sarah wrote was a masterpiece of clarity and technical detail. It was titled Intermittent Engine Derate on 9RX Series Tractors Correlated with Hydraulic Load and Auto Track Engagement. It explained the concept of inductive crosstalk, showed photos of the problematic harness routing, and provided a step-by-step guide for diagnosing the issue with an oscilloscope and implementing the simple 4-minute fix. With Frank's funding, it was distributed widely. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of dealerships and independent shops from across North America contacted her, reporting that they had tractors in their shops with the exact same unsolvable problem. Her bulletin allowed them to fix the machines in minutes, saving farmers millions of dollars in collective downtime and unnecessary repairs. The story of the Iowa 9RX Ghost and the 4-minute fix became a legend in the agricultural mechanics community. John Deere's corporate engineering department in Waterloo, Iowa, got wind of the bulletin. They were initially defensive, but after their own field engineers replicated the issue and confirmed Sarah's diagnosis was 100% correct, they were forced to acknowledge the design flaw. They flew Sarah out to their headquarters and offered her a high-paying job as a senior diagnostic engineer. She politely declined. "I appreciate the offer," she told the team of executives, "but I can't solve problems like this from inside a cubicle. My value is in the field where the machines actually live." Instead, she signed a lucrative consulting contract with them to help redesign their diagnostic training programs and to review new vehicle designs for potential electronic and system-level flaws. Sarah's business, Mitchell Diagnostic Solutions, exploded. She became the go-to consultant for the most complex problems in the agricultural industry. She hired and trained a small team of engineers, teaching them a unique methodology. But she never stopped being a field technician. She still spent most of her time on the road in her mobile command center, driving to remote farms to listen to broken machines and translate their silent language of failure into elegant solutions. Frank Miller became her biggest client and her most vocal advocate. His entire fleet of over 100 machines was put under her diagnostic care, and his company's maintenance costs and downtime dropped by over 60% in the first year. The cursed John Deere 9RX 830 became a symbol of their partnership. Frank had a small plaque made and mounted it in the cab. It read, "This machine was fixed in 4 minutes. It cost $20,000 and 3 weeks to find the right person to do it. Expertise is everything." The story is a powerful reminder that in our world of incredible technological complexity, the biggest and most expensive problems can sometimes stem from the smallest, most overlooked details. It's a testament to the fact that true expertise is not about following a flowchart, but about having the deep systemic understanding to know when the flowchart is wrong. It's about having the curiosity to ask why when everyone else is just focused on what. The 30 mechanics who failed were not bad mechanics. They were simply looking at the wrong part of the puzzle. Sarah succeeded because she was the only one who understood that she wasn't fixing a tractor. She was debugging a network. So, as we finish this story, I ask you, one last time, where are you watching from? What is the 4-minute fix in your own life or work? The simple solution to a complex problem that was hiding in plain sight, a detail that everyone else missed. Let me know in the comments below. Because Sarah Chen proved that sometimes the most valuable tool isn't a wrench or a new part, but a different perspective. Let's build a community that celebrates finding that one game-changing detail together.